So it is good to be connecting with you all digitally. I know that these are unprecedented times, and obviously it would be better to be meeting in person, but this will have to do for now. So I'm sure, excuse me, like myself, a lot of you are beginning to go a little stir crazy. We've been probably at home a lot over the last weeks. Most of us are forced to spend our time at home with, jobs shutting down, community spaces closed, with restaurants being just takeout only. Those are obviously a lot of the places we frequent. And so maybe, we're all going just a little stir crazy here, but I have been really grateful for Pete and for Andy for sharing their gifts of sharing devotions and music over the last couple weeks. And I just wanted to offer something as well, to bring something to the table. So each Thursday, we're going to be looking at some different spiritual disciplines and several ways that we can engage and practice those spiritual disciplines. Now, spiritual disciplines are simply practices that we intentionally engage in so that our minds, our souls, and our bodies are more in tune with the Spirit of God. We train ourselves much like athletes do, training in their craft, so that we can grow in our relationship with God. We carve out time in our lives so that through these disciplines, we can draw nearer to God. And what better time to start engaging in those when we probably all have a little extra time on our hands. So today, we're not going to be on here for too long, but I want to simply give you an overview of what spiritual disciplines are, and to say a few things about spiritual disciplines, what they are and what they are not. And I'm going to close with a few suggestions on maybe reorienting your time and your life, maybe developing a new rhythm for this new normal that we're all living in. So as we get started here, let's just simply get a working definition of what spiritual disciplines are. So spiritual disciplines are simply practices that engage our inner life so that we might go deeper than we ever thought possible. I'll say that one more time. Spiritual disciplines are simply practices that engage our inner life so that we might go deeper than we ever thought possible. Spiritual disciplines help us to be reflective and mindful of not only ourselves, but the world around us and how we interact with those who are around us. So Richard Foster wrote a book called The Celebration of Discipline. And if you haven't read it or you've never heard of it, I highly recommend it. I've read through it probably 2 or 3 times in my life, and I feel like every time I read through it, I catch something new. But in that book, he had this to say, and this is actually from the first page of the book. He says, "Superficiality is the curse of our age. The doctrine of instant satisfaction is primarily a spiritual problem. The desperate need today is not for a greater number of intelligent people or gifted people, but for deep people. The classical spiritual disciplines of the spiritual life call us to move beyond surface living and into the depths. They invite us to explore the inner caverns of the spiritual realm. They urge us to be the answer to a hollow world." So just a few notes on spiritual disciplines, what they are and what they aren't. And the first one I want to say is that these practices are not laws. We do not engage in spiritual disciplines as commandments so that, we are doing something good or that we are doing, what we are told we should do. That's not why we participate in them. We do them because they help us to center ourselves in God, to center ourselves in that relationship that we have with God. So don't think of spiritual disciplines as laws. Like if you don't do it one day, then you got to be worried or something. They're there to help you. They are not laws. So number 2, not every method of engaging in a discipline works for every person. Each one of us is made uniquely in the image of God. And so I, for one, am not an artist. So a spiritual discipline that relies heavily on art usually doesn't do much for me. I feel like an outsider trying to engage whenever it's something art focused. However, I do enjoy reading and writing. And so practices like journaling and devotional reading are much more suited for me. So let's take prayer, for example, probably the most common spiritual discipline that we all, hopefully at least sometimes engage in. There are many folks who use art as a medium to pray. They will paint or they will draw their prayers to God, and that is great. But I struggle with that because whenever I put a marker or a paintbrush to paper, it always comes out looking awful. So I don't relate to that, and it is really helpful for me. However, there are others who like to maybe have a rhythm, a rhythm in reading tied to their prayer life. And this is where I find the most help. I will often, read prayers of others as part of my prayer time and say them as my own. And by doing so, I gain the wisdom of other saints along the way. So be creative. And I will say through all of this, on this weekly chat, I will not even begin to scratch the surface of all that the spiritual disciplines have to offer. In fact, there are some really good methods that haven't even been created yet. And maybe that's part of what you will do during this time. So do what works best for you, as long as you sense that it's drawing you closer to God. Remember, it's not a checklist of things to do, but rather practices that aid us in deepening a relationship. So if you feel like you're going against the grain, or you feel like, man, this just really isn't working for me, that's okay. You don't have to engage in that way. Try something else. So then third, and this is my last note on spiritual disciplines, don't be intimidated. I know talk of doing all sorts of these new ideas might be intimidating to you. But spiritual disciplines are not just for those spiritual giants in the world, but for everyone. They can easily be engaged by those who live ordinary lives. They're meant for people who live ordinary lives. This is not like an academic course that you can fail. The pressure is off. When you choose to engage, you get a passing grade. So don't be intimidated. Find something that works for you, and don't treat it like a law that you have to follow in that way. So today, I'm not even going to give you a classic spiritual discipline to try, a classic discipline like prayer or fasting or study or something like that. What I want to do instead is to set all of us up for success going into next week and talk briefly about our rhythms for life. So what I want to encourage all of us to do over the coming days is to take inventory on how you are spending your time in this new normal. I have already personally found that it is very easy to fall into the trap of living your weekend life all throughout the week, especially when you're cooped up at home and you don't really have anywhere to go or anything to do. Our church staff, for the most part, began working from home this week, so it's already been an adjustment for me personally. My normal workday routine would begin with waking up, making coffee, getting a shower, getting dressed for work, and then heading into the church. And now, if I wanted to, all I have to do is simply wake up and stumble over to my desk in what I slept in. And I could be good to go for work. I don't have to be presentable, all that stuff of going out into the world. So I would encourage you to be, and myself, to be intentional with our time. This is your unconventional spiritual discipline for this week. Try your best to keep a rhythm during this week like you normally would. Like when you think about back when when life wasn't this crazy, what did a normal rhythm of life look like for you? And so reflect on that and where you are now, and try to keep a rhythm during the week like you normally would. And if you find yourself with not much to do, maybe you can engage in a new hobby. Like for instance, I have a guitar sitting in my house that I've never learned to play. And that's one of the things that I have said to myself I want to try and do. And so instead of just sitting, in front of the TV all day or whatever, maybe I pick up my guitar and try and learn a few chords. Maybe some of you are into things like art and crafting, or maybe even woodworking or something like that. Spend time creating. Don't just consume over these next few weeks or potentially months. And I would say even limit the hours you spend in front of a TV or on social media. These things aren't inherently bad, but they can become addictive to us, and turn us into people that we aren't. We become, oversaturated consumers instead of creators. We were all created to work and to create, and you can still do that. You may just have to find different avenues to go about those things. So use those God-given creative muscles during this time. And then next week, when we tune in, once we all hopefully have reflected and put a new rhythm into place for this new normal, I think you will find, and I will find, that we have time, more time than we thought, to carve out in which to engage the deep life of spiritual disciplines. So that is all I have for you this week. I hope that is helpful. I hope that we can all find a new rhythm for a new normal in life, so that it doesn't overwhelm us and it doesn't burden us, but there will be time for us to grow, time for us to create, and time for us to draw nearer to God through that. So with that, I will say goodbye to you all. And again, you can rewatch this, I believe, afterwards on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. So we'll see you all next week.